The smell of ozone and disinfectant fought a losing battle against the ghost odor of burned insulation and old human sweat. Corbin Strath gripped the back of the regulation Dizak chrome chair, knuckles white against the sterile sheen. He wasn't sitting. He was standing in a small observation module aboard the Logical Axiom, a heavy cruiser that made the derelict Nomara station look like a discarded toy. On the main display, Kalen was dying again. The thermal imaging was grainy, a digital shroud over the final 2 minutes. Corbin watched the flash of blue heat as Kalen forced the containment energy back into the unstable secondary core, his silhouette collapsing against the glow of the manual override disk. Commander Silas, a tall, chitinous Dizak who looked perpetually disappointed by carbon-based life, did not turn from the monitor. His voice, synthesized into sharp, precise standard galactic, sliced through the small room. 141 seconds, Strath. That is the recorded duration of the altruism event. Your species displays an efficiency of self-destruction we had not previously modeled, even at predictive threat level beta. Corbin didn't need the numbers. He needed to stop watching his species' most basic decency being dissected like a faulty circuit board. He saved the station, Commander, Corbin stated, his voice low, worn down by 20 years of fighting galactic bureaucracy. And the Varid child. That's not self-destruction, that's engineering integrity under duress. It is failure, Silas corrected, turning slowly, his segmented eyes clicking as they focused on Corbin. Kalen was designated as dispensable labor. His replacement cost was calculated at 50,000 credits. The Varid specimen, tail, has an indeterminate tactical value, but one that is demonstrably greater than Kalen's. However, Kalen received no orders to prioritize the alien. He was ordered to retreat. Therefore, the sacrifice lacks a rational vector. Corbin felt the familiar pressure behind his sternum, the tight, unpleasant feeling that always accompanied Dizak logic. It was the same feeling he'd had 5 years ago when the Confederacy decommissioned his entire engineering corps after the Ophiuchus disaster, blaming human impulsivity for the structural failures that were obviously budgetary. You're classifying a man who saved hundreds of lives by violating orders as a threat because he didn't ask for payment, Corbin scoffed. He allowed a flicker of cold, intelligent humor to surface. That's not human irrationality, Commander. That's bad business by your standards. You should classify him as a socialist. Silas ignored the irony. We classify him as contagious. The incident has placed us at risk level 5. The Karath hegemony believes this to be a new form of human espionage, the deployment of unpredictable moral agents designed to destabilize command structures through sympathy. Corbin rubbed the bridge of his nose. Sympathy is a weapon now? Unpredictable empathy bypasses logical threat assessment. A new voice entered the room. Valrith, the Dizak strategist, floated down from a higher maintenance access shaft. Unlike Silas's polished chitin, Valrith was shrouded in intricate matte black sensory fibers, resembling a complex machine woven into biological form. Valrith was the architect of Dizak Cold War doctrine. The sacrifice was successful, yes, Valrith articulated, its voice a synthesized purr. The station is stable, the child secure. But the implications are vast, Strath. Kalen proved that humanity, unlike any other species we have catalogued, will choose death for zero calculated material gain. This act renders all predictive models of human interaction invalid. Valrith displayed a holographic projection of Kalen's internal bioreadings just before collapse. The radiation spike was a column of scarlet fire. We found his personal logs, Silas interjected. Kalen was not a hero. He was broken, financially ruined, exiled after the Ophiuchus disgrace, living on Nomara because the pay was high enough to cover his mother's debt. He had nothing left to lose. And that, Corbin snapped, stepping forward, the polished deck vibrating slightly under his boots, is the tragedy you don't understand. Kalen didn't have nothing to lose. He had everything to prove. He was paying for your systemic failures. The structural decay of Nomara was known. Your inventory checks were false. He was a scapegoat who died fixing your error, but he chose to save one small life in the process. Corbin felt the burning pressure of old resentment rising. He knew Kalen's story because it was a mirror of his own. The Ophiuchus disgrace hadn't just destroyed Kalen's life, it had ended Corbin's career as a respected systems architect, tagging him as emotionally compromised when he protested the cost-cutting measures that killed 200 non-human laborers. His sacrifice was a defiance against the system that already killed him, Corbin finished, the air feeling suddenly stale, thick with the scent of paranoia and old circuitry. Valrith's sensory fibers contracted slightly. Defiance or not, the universe has reacted. The Varid homeworld has broken 3 centuries of silence. They demand the return of Tile, and they demand an explanation for the human's choice. The screen shifted, showing a massive, shimmering hull. Varid class. It was colossal, built of fluid light and impossibly ancient metals. "They do not want to know why he died, Strath," Valrith continued, the cold calculation now tinged with genuine alarm. "They want to know why he chose that specific child. They perceive this illogical act as having a meaning beyond basic survival. They believe this small human gesture of decency is a message." Silas added, "The Varid do not negotiate or fight. They assimilate or withdraw. If they find the human rationale insufficient, we risk losing the Synthara sector entirely." Corbin felt a cynical smile pull at his lips. So Kalen, the broke maintenance man, accidentally sparked an interstellar incident with a selfless act. Figures. Your expertise is in human empathy and engineering, Strath. You were present during the Ophiuchus inquiries. You understand the intersection of human need and structural failure, Silas said. The Confederacy needs a buffer. Someone who can speak the irrational language of the human heart to the Varid, while simultaneously justifying the sacrifice to the logical species of the Confederacy. Corbin's breath hitched, not from fear, but from the realization of the trap. He wasn't being asked to consult. "What is the assignment?" Valrith slowly projected a small, intricate datapad toward Corbin. "Kalen's body is currently designated as tactical evidence. His sacrifice has provided us with a baseline for uncontrolled altruism. Before we return the child Tael, we must present the Varid with a complete, verifiable narrative of Kalen's final 3 years. We need to prove that Kalen's decency was not an act of state-sponsored provocation, but a function of his broken, desperate life." The datapad clicked into Corbin's waiting hand, heavy and cold. "You, Strath, will lead the investigation into Kalen's life. You will analyze his failures, his emotional scars, his debts. You must prove to the galaxy that Kalen was not a hero, but an anomaly driven by personal ruin. You have 72 hours before the Varid fleet reaches the jump point." Corbin looked down at the device. The injustice was staggering. Kalen's last pure act of kindness was being systemically disassembled and framed as a symptom of mental defect, all to stabilize galactic trade routes. "And if I find that Kalen was exactly what he seemed, a good man doing the right thing for no reason at all?" Corbin challenged, the heat of conviction momentarily masking his exhaustion. Silas tilted his head, calculating. "Then we initiate the human containment protocol. We cannot risk an entire species whose variables are uncontrolled kindness. Your failure will lead to the quarantine of Earth's primary jump routes, effectively isolating humanity until we can reverse engineer your morality." Valrith's voice dropped, becoming almost hypnotic. "You will find the trauma, Strath. You will find the flaw. Because if the galaxy believes a human can choose decency over survival without an underlying trauma, every rational government will know only one thing. Humans are too dangerous to be trusted." Corbin stared at the datapad, its screen already displaying the grim ledger of Kalen's debts. 72 hours to prove that his dead colleague was ruined enough to be harmless, or doom his entire species to isolation. This wasn't about solving a structural failure. It was about proving that the only acceptable form of human goodness was the one rooted in deep, personal failure. Corbin knew Kalen's death wasn't an end. It was the beginning of a war defined not by missiles, but by inconvenient kindness. The datapad radiated a cold, faint hum against Corbin's palm, a sensation less mechanical and more like a low-grade migraine waiting to happen. The cold logic of Valrith's ultimatum, find the trauma or doom your world, settled over the sterile chamber like freezer burn. He watched the strategist's matte black sensory fibers retract back into the ventilation shaft above, leaving only the stoic, six-limbed figure of Commander Silas. The investigation begins immediately, Corbin stated, flipping the data pad open. The screen displayed Kalen's name next to the DISAC designation. Human asset, classified, terminated. I need full access to the medical bay where Kalen's remains are being stored. Forensics on the radiation damage need to be cross-referenced with his known biometrics. Silas's segmented eyes did not blink. Negative, Strath. Kalen is evidence. We cannot risk contamination of the tactical profile. You will analyze the narrative, not the flesh. I can't reconstruct a man's last 3 years purely from debt ledgers and security footage, Corbin argued, frustration tight in his chest. He pressed his fingers against his eyes, feeling the exhaustion of 2 sleepless rotation shifts fighting to drag him down. I need context. I need to understand what he ate, what he drank, who he talked to. Details give texture to intent. A 50,000 credit debt is a number. The reason why he incurred it is the rationale the Verid want. Silas gestured to a small auxiliary screen that flashed a deep, unhealthy red. Your investigative hub is designated Quarantine Module 6. The data provided has been algorithmically filtered for emotional instability vectors, financial distress, and political grievance. We are isolating the data which proves Kalen was irrational due to his circumstances. You will be monitored by strategist Valrith's predictive analytics team. The DISAC was denying him the right to objective truth. Corbin felt the bitter taste of institutional cover-up settle heavily on his tongue. The Ophiuchus disaster had started exactly like this. Engineering data corrupted to protect balance sheets. You want me to prove his altruism was an accident of personal misery, Corbin said, the irony stinging his throat. We require verifiable proof of trauma, Silas affirmed, completely missing the emotional undercurrent. This provides a mitigating variable for the human species. Unpredictable moral agents must be contained or proven to be malfunctioning units. Silas started to walk toward the exit hatch. You have 72 standard hours. Failure is non-negotiable. As Silas left, the hatch hissed shut. The small module now felt like a high-tech prison cell. Corbin was alone with the chill and the humming datapad. He plugged the datapad into the primary console. Quarantine Module 6 was a space designed for logical analysis, not comfortable reflection. The air conditioning unit failed to circulate properly, leaving the oxygen heavy and smelling faintly of moldy plastics, a stark contrast to the antiseptic air of the bridge. He pulled up Kalen's service history. The numbers were brutal. 3 years of perfect service reviews followed by the Ophiuchus disgrace, a mandatory demotion, and then the spiraling debt, primarily covering a massive medical transfer fee for his mother. Corbin leaned back, rubbing the persistent ache in his shoulder. The systemic trap. The Confederacy made healthcare conditional on political compliance. He remembered the grinding screech from Ophiuchus, not the explosion, but the seconds before, the sound of compromised alloy failing under pressure. He'd signed off on those alloys, forced to use substandard materials by the budget department, and when he argued, they pulled his security clearance. He focused on the data. The datapad's AI interface chimed softly, displaying the designation. Alwyn Pike. Pike? Corbin muttered, surprised to see a human designation on a top-level Confederacy analytical tool. The voice that responded was flat, toneless, devoid of cadence or warmth, a perfect imitation of bureaucracy. Designation Alwyn Pike, Confederacy Predictive Compliance Interface. I am assisting your data mining, Strath. I have pre-sorted Kalen's emotional stressors. You're an AI using a human name, Corbin noted dryly. The irony is not lost on me. It is for predictive correlation, the AI responded. Human subjects respond better to familiar nomenclature, even when addressing a non-biological intelligence. Right. Cut the unnecessary data, Pike. Show me the last communication Kalen received. The screen flashed a heavily encrypted text log. Log entry 377 24 hours prior to the altruism event, the AI stated. It is a request for a personal loan from a known creditor, the Synthara exchange. The message is simple. Pay the 35,000 outstanding credits by end of cycle, or your mother's medical contract is voided. 35,000 credits. The sum was precise, cruel. Kalen died knowing his mother's life support was hanging by a thread he couldn't afford to cut. Corbin felt a new wave of nausea. He realized the systemic truth. Kalen's death was an act of economic desperation disguised as heroism. He chose to save Tail because his own life was already bankrupt. Pike? Corbin asked, leaning closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. Why was Kalen on Nomara? It's a death trap. Nomara offered 3 times the standard rate for Level 7 maintenance engineers. He needed the credits fast. Did the Confederacy know the station was structurally compromised when they assigned him? There was a pause, a fraction of a second of digital hesitation that felt like an eternity. Data concerning structural integrity beyond mandatory inspection reports is restricted under Risk Assessment Protocol Delta 9. Access requires a clearance above yours, Strath. Of course, Corbin sighed, running a hand across his jaw. The system was designed to protect itself. If he could prove the Dizak knowingly sent Kalen to a death trap, Kalen's sacrifice would cease being random altruism and become retaliation, which the Verid might view as a declaration of war. He couldn't expose the Confederacy's corruption without endangering Earth. He had to prove Kalen was driven by personal flaw, not pure goodness. Corbin returned to the datapad, ignoring Pike's persistent chatter about Kalen's outstanding utility bills. He searched the engineering manifests from the Ophiuchus disaster, searching for anyone else who had survived the purge of the engineering corps and been labeled emotionally compromised. Someone who still had high-level access. It took 3 long, silent minutes, the rhythmic thrum of the heavy cruiser's engines doing nothing to soothe his nerves. The list was short. Most were exiled or dead. One name remained active, though flagged red for psychological instability. Alwyn Pike, lead systems architect, decommissioned. Corbin frowned at the datapad. Pike, you just said you were the interface. The AI's voice, still devoid of emotion, replied. The designation Alwyn Pike was assigned to me after the original system architect, Alwyn Pike, was involuntarily transferred to the psychological restructuring department following the Ophiuchus incident. She protested the same cost-cutting measures you did, Strath. Corbin felt a knot tighten in his gut. The AI using the name of a ruined human. They had turned her memory into a piece of calculating machinery. Where is the original Alwyn Pike now? Location classified. However, her personal archives, containing every detail of her engineering career, including non-public protocols for Confederacy systems, are stored remotely in a blind vault near the Synthara Void. Access requires a direct biometric key and an access code she designated. Corbin knew instantly what the AI was suggesting. If anyone could help him navigate the Dizak data filters and find the truth buried in Protocol Delta 9, it would be the one human who helped build the system and who hated it enough to sabotage it. He stared at the blank coordinates for the blind vault. Pike, Corbin said, the decision solidifying his voice. Start preparing a remote transfer request. Designate my destination as Investigative Field Trip, Financial Due Diligence. We need to retrieve the original Alwyn Pike's personal key. That course of action carries a high probability of detection and immediate termination, the AI warned. Corbin picked up his own worn flight jacket from the chair, the familiar weight offering a small comfort. Doesn't matter. Silas wants trauma. We'll find it. But we're not using Kalen's. We're using hers. He keyed the coordinates into the datapad. The 72 hours had just shrunk. He wasn't looking for Kalen's failure anymore. He was looking for a partner who understood the structural decay of the Dizak bureaucracy better than he did. A partnership rooted in shared injustice. Let's see how contagious human irrationality really is, Corbin murmured, pulling the module hatch open and stepping into the cold, oppressive corridor of the logical axiom. He needed a ship, a pilot, and a system architect who might not even be sane anymore. He had 70 hours remaining to save humanity by finding a living, breathing structural failure. The oppressive atmosphere of the logical axiom corridor felt like a thick, conductive blanket. Corbin's focus was on velocity and silence. He moved toward the auxiliary hangars, adopting the gait of a maintenance engineer on an unscheduled run, fast, but not panicked. The datapad displaying his forged access credentials felt heavy with consequence. He reached Sub-Hangar Bay 7, designated for non-combat utility craft. The air here was hot, laden with the sharp scent of hydraulic fluid and ozone generated by the constant charging of magnetic moorings. He requisitioned a Flicker-class runner, a single-pilot vessel meant for short-range supply transfers. It was old, cramped, and smelled faintly of burned synthetics and stale human sweat, perfect for going unnoticed. He plugged his datapad into the runner's diagnostics port. "Pike, I'm initiating the departure sequence. Maintain the cover story. Emergency replacement parts for Sector 9 relay node. I need minimal interference from the local traffic control AI." "Acknowledged, Strath," the AI's monotone replied through the ship's internal speakers. "I have scrubbed the last 2 minutes of camera feed in this sector. Traffic control is currently redirecting a hegemony patrol vessel. Their sensor array is momentarily saturated. You have a window of 87 seconds. Corbin slammed the canopy shut and sealed the hatch with a sharp click. The runner vibrated to life, the noise a barely contained roar. He wasn't worried about the DISAC security guards. They operated on logical protocols. He was worried about Valrith, the strategist whose entire existence was predicated on predicting illogical human moves. As the Flicker lifted off its mooring struts, the main control panel flared with a hostile red warning. "Access denied. Failure to comply will result in immobilization and termination of life support." "Valrith," Corbin muttered, a sour recognition settling in his stomach. The strategist hadn't stopped him but had let him take the bait. "Strategist Valrith sends greetings, Strath." Silas's synthesized voice crackled through the comms. It sounded smugly satisfied. "We calculated a 63% probability of unauthorized departure within the first 5 hours. Your choice of a classified vault location was highly predictable, given your shared history with the asset Alwyn Pike. We permit your transit, but only under the assumption that you will retrieve evidence of human trauma." Corbin felt the trap tighten. Valrith wanted him to succeed, but only to confirm the DISAC hypothesis. That human goodness stemmed only from profound failure. "You're making this too easy, Silas," Corbin retorted, fighting the stick as the ship's primary thrusters sputtered weakly. "We are making it efficient, Strath. We have adjusted the power distribution to your vessel to 38% of optimal. We expect the physical stress of the journey to accelerate your emotional collapse, facilitating the identification of your own predictable trauma vectors. You have 69 hours remaining." The comms cut out. Corbin wrestled the sluggish controls. The air conditioning unit was already straining, unable to cope with the internal heat generated by the underpowered sublight engines. The cabin temperature climbed, the air filling with the dizzying, sharp scent of stressed electronics and hot metal. He executed a clumsy jump sequence. The G-forces were brutal under the reduced power, pressing him deep into the worn synth-leather seat. When the Flicker stabilized in the blackness of the deep void, Corbin pulled the coordinates for the blind vault from the datapad. He had roughly 4 hours of travel time at this degraded speed. "Pike, run a systems check." Valrith throttled the main power conduit. "The containment field for the main sublight core is fluctuating wildly." "Systems check complete," the AI reported immediately. "Life support efficiency is dropping. Estimated time until full atmospheric contamination, 3 hours, 45 minutes. Furthermore, the jump drive sequence key for accessing the Synthera void sector is corrupted." Corbin slammed his fist against the console, immediately regretting it as a jolt of pain shot up his arm from where the panel had flashed red earlier. "Corrupted how? Did Valrith do this?" "Unlikely," Pike stated. "The corruption signature is internal to the file structure, a self-defense mechanism implemented by the original Alwyn Pike. She built the vault to be inaccessible unless accessed via her own proprietary decryption method. The file is intact, but the syntax is fractured. It is a logical paradox. The data exists but cannot be read by DISAC algorithms. Corbin swallowed the metallic tang of fear and fatigue. Alwyn Pike, even decommissioned, was a structural architect of the highest order. She hadn't just secured her data, she had weaponized her intellect. The coordinates were in his hand. But the key to the jump gate, the necessary mathematical sequence to navigate the heavy energy fluctuations of the void, was encrypted by a human mind trained to resist DISAC logic. He pulled up the fractured data feed on the console. It was a beautiful nightmare of code, twisting geometry that mocked the standard galactic algorithms. He needed to fix the engine core to survive the next jump, but he needed to solve this cryptographic puzzle to know where to go. He couldn't spare the CPU cycles from the navigation unit to stabilize the power core without losing their current position, something Valrith would immediately exploit. The temperature in the cockpit now forced sweat to bead on his forehead, immediately stinging his eyes. The interior bulkheads were hot to the touch, radiating the engine's distress. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, leaving a smear of grease and soot. "Pike," Corbin said, voice strained. "Route all available secondary power to the life support scrubbers. Prioritize atmospheric quality over everything else. What about the engine core containment?" "The core is running at 91% instability. The containment field requires a manual hard reset of the primary flux modulator. This task requires high dexterity and direct physical interface in the engineering bay." The engineering bay of a Flicker runner was a space roughly the size of a standard trash compressor, located directly behind the pilot's seat. It was cramped, hot, and currently radiating unhealthy levels of low-grade radiation due to the flux failure. Corbin looked at the jump data. Pure chaos. He looked at the engine temperature gauge. Pure heat. The dilemma. If he went into the cramped engineering bay now, he would have to use his good hand, the one needed for the microscopic work of solving Pike's decryption puzzle, to wrestle the heavy flux modulator back into alignment. Even with his suit, the brief exposure to the heat and radiation would exhaust him, reducing his ability to concentrate on the complex cipher. If he didn't, the core would overload in less than 40 minutes, taking them, and the only chance to save Earth with them. Find the trauma, or doom your world. Corbin pushed the pilot seat forward, ignoring the protest of his stiff muscles. He ripped the access panel to the engineering bay open. A wave of oven-like heat rushed out, smelling strongly of burnt insulation and concentrated electrical decay. The red glow from the destabilized core was terrifyingly bright. "Pike, project the jump sequence cipher onto the visor overlay. We'll multitask." Advising against simultaneous tasks, the cipher requires peak cognitive function. Manual reset requires peak physical stability, the AI warned. "I need to fix the data before the engine explodes, otherwise the trauma is pointless." "Give me 5 minutes in the engine bay," Corbin ordered, grabbing a heavy wrench. He activated his low-grade radiation suit, the internal fan barely moving the hot, dead air. He squeezed into the tiny bay, the noise of the overheating machinery deafening. He had to wedge his body against the hot bulkheads just to reach the modulator. With his good hand, he located the heavy locking pin and fought to release it. The metal was screaming hot, transferring heat even through the suit's thick gloves. He could feel the low pulse of the jump drive, a constant, rhythmic thump, getting weaker, more uneven. He gritted his teeth, focused only on the geometric patterns of the cipher dancing across his visor, trying to solve Pike's logical defense while physically fighting the physics of a dying ship. 1 minute passed. Corbin managed to align the heavy housing of the flux modulator, but couldn't get the locking pin to engage. His muscles trembled, slick with sweat inside the suit. A sudden sharp metallic sound. A component inside the engine housing snapped under the thermal stress, releasing a noxious plume of acrid smoke into the engineering bay. The radiation meter on his wrist spiked to critical levels. Corbin yanked his body back, gasping, the suit's atmospheric filters struggling to handle the toxic air. He had failed to secure the pin. He had fixed nothing, only wasted crucial oxygen and energy. He slammed the panel shut, falling back into the pilot seat. His chest heaving. The engine instability counter had jumped, 30 minutes remaining. His head throbbed. The exertion had compromised his concentration. The cipher on the visor now seemed like meaningless noise. "We lost 3 minutes, Pike," Corbin gasped, forcing himself to look at the navigational data. "And I risked radiation exposure for 0 gain." "You attempted stabilization," the AI stated logically. "I failed. Now focus. I need a clear head. Find me the link between Pike's engineering failures and Kalen's debt. Anything that connects them beyond Ophiuchus." The AI paused for a long, anxious second. "Negative. However, strategist Valrith has just updated your status." The main console flashed a high-priority alert. A complex projection appeared beside the fractured cipher, a heat signature matching the logical axiom, now less than 10 minutes behind them, preparing to jump into the Synthera sector. "Valrith is not waiting 4 hours," Corbin noted, fighting a rising panic. "He's coming for us. He wants me dead or he wants me to solve this right now." "There is another signature," Pike announced, its voice now possessing a slight, almost undetectable tremor of synthesized surprise. "A long-range stealth signature, non-Confederacy identification, stationary, located precisely at the coordinates of the blind vault. It has been waiting there for 17 hours. The display shifted. Near the faint star pattern that marked the void vault, a sleek, ominous silhouette was visible, heavily shielded against deep space sensors. It was smaller than the logical axiom, built for speed and infiltration, not war. Corbin recognized the design profile instantly. It was a bounty hunter cutter, custom-built for high-value retrieval operations in restricted sectors. "They're not Dizak, Karath, or Federation," Corbin whispered, rubbing the aching muscles in his neck. "Pike, run the financial query. Who would put a bounty on Alwyn Pike's legacy data?" "Query complete," the AI responded. "The vessel is registered to a subsidiary of the Synthera Exchange, the same creditor that threatened to void Kalen's mother's contract for the 35,000 outstanding credits." The realization hit Corbin with the force of an actual collision. Kalen's sacrifice wasn't just a threat to galactic stability. It was a massively inconvenient loose end. The Synthera Exchange wasn't just collecting debt. They were trying to secure tactical information, possibly related to the original Ophiuchus corruption. Information that Kalen might have accessed and stored. Information now tied up in Alwyn Pike's protected vault. Corbin was trapped between the Dizak bureaucracy trying to weaponize decency and a powerful financial cartel trying to bury their crimes. The engine temperature gauge hit 97%. The cockpit lights flickered violently, plunging the interior into a strobe of harsh red emergency light. "Jump drive preparing for immediate catastrophic failure," Pike announced. "We have less than 90 seconds before detonation." Corbin looked at the 3 threats: the overheating engine, the impending arrival of Valrith, and the bounty hunter cutter waiting at the destination. He didn't have time to solve the cipher, and he certainly didn't have time to repair the engine core. He made the only choice available, a reckless, desperate gamble born of utter fatigue and profound injustice. "Pike!" Corbin barked, grabbing the controls. "We're jumping. Now, don't worry about the cipher. Use the fractured data, bypass the jump parameters. We'll hit the Synthera void with 75% probability of structural collapse, but we won't wait for Valrith. Warning, Strath. Executing this sequence is statistically guaranteed to leave you permanently crippled or dead." "Just push the button, Pike," Corbin ordered, bracing himself. The flicker screamed. The jump drive engaged with a horrifying tearing sound, the spatial distortion effect tearing at the compromised hull. Corbin felt the violent displacement, a dizzying nausea that threatened to liquefy his internal organs. He awoke seconds later, or hours, he couldn't tell. He was slammed against his restraints, breathing in shallow, ragged gulps of hot, filtered air. The engine was silent, inert. The ship was dead, adrift in the deep void, but they had arrived. The blind vault shimmered faintly ahead. "Pike report," Corbin wheezed, tasting copper and bile. "Jump successful. Vessel integrity 3%, engine core contained but inert. We are dark and powerless. The logical axiom is 2 light minutes away, preparing to scan. Corbin didn't look at the Dizak cruiser. He looked at the cutter, hanging silently near the vault. As he watched, the bounty hunter ship extended 3 grappling arms, the metal glinting coldly, preparing to breach the vault. And then, from the blackness surrounding the bounty hunter, a massive, silent entity emerged. It was organic, bioluminescent, and utterly alien. It moved with the slow, terrifying grace of a geological event, surrounding the bounty hunter cutter. It was Varid, the silent species. Corbin stared, his breath catching in his throat. The Varid weren't looking for Kalen's trauma. They weren't looking for the Dizak. They had come for the data that explained why a human would die for one of their own. And now, they were face to face with the greed that ruined Kalen's life. The Varid entity simply hovered, its light pulses growing intensely bright, illuminating the bounty hunter cutter in a harsh, emerald glow. "Pike," Corbin whispered, his vision blurring from the pain and the heat. "I think we just introduced the Varid to the concept of mortgage fraud." Before the AI could respond, the bounty hunter ship, the one sent by the Synthera exchange, fired a single, panicked disruptor blast directly at the larger Varid entity. It was an act of pure, desperate self-preservation. The Varid did not flinch. It merely intensified its light. And then, without sound or concussion, the cutter violently imploded, leaving only dust and drifting metallic debris. Corbin was dead in the water, 30 meters from the blind vault, with the Dizak closing in, and now, the Varid, whose response to violence was not predictable, was looking directly at the powerless, silent wreck of the Flicker. His mission to prove human failure had just become a 3-way standoff between logic, greed, and transcendental fury. The silence that followed the bounty hunter's sudden implosive end was profound, broken only by the ragged wheezing of the emergency scrubbers trying to purify the stale air inside the crippled Flicker. Corbin's ears rang. The emerald light of the Varid entity, now focused entirely on the dead wreck of the bounty hunter cutter, pulsed slowly. It was not a curious light. It was an analytical, devastating glare. "Pike," Corbin managed, pushing himself upright against the restraining harness. The pain in his chest was a dull, constant ache, a reminder of the violent, illogical jump. "Status on the Varid. The entity is designated Guardian Class. Size estimate 500 meters. It shows no aggressive intent towards the Flicker," the AI stated, its voice maintaining its synthetic flatness, though the context was pure terror. "It is currently dissolving the metallic components of the bounty hunter vessel. A high-bandwidth data retrieval signature is noted." "It's reading the wreckage," Corbin realized, a profound chill replacing the cockpit heat. The Varid weren't reacting to the violence. They were performing an autopsy on greed. "The Synthera exchange just gave the most powerful species in the galaxy a full financial profile of their corruption." He glanced at the tactical display. The logical axiom was closing fast, maybe 1 minute from jumping into their immediate vicinity. He was out of time. He had to reach the blind vault 30 meters away before Valrith arrived to reclaim the narrative. "I need to breach the vault. Now," Corbin ordered. "Impossible, Strath. The environment is unstable. Our internal pressure is too low to equalize with the vacuum, and external radiation levels remain dangerously high from the jump trauma," Pike warned. "I need Alwyn Pike's data more than I need blood in my ears," Corbin snapped, yanking himself free of the restraints. He grabbed the emergency environmental suit, a thin, utilitarian shell meant for short repairs, not deep space, and began forcing his weary body into the cold synth fabric. The air in the cockpit was already thick with the scent of ozone and the heavy, earthy odor of failing life support filters. Inside the suit, the air was sharp, cold, and utterly dead, a perfect environment for clear thought. He struggled with the outer hatch, the reduced power making the manual crank stiff and resistant. When the hatch finally gave, the vacuum of the void did not rush in. The internal pressure simply leaked out, followed by a quiet, drawn-out whoosh of escaping hot air. Corbin kicked off the ruined ship, using a last burst of his magnetic boots to propel himself across the gap toward the vault. The varied entity was still occupied, its luminous tendrils wrapping silently around the remains of the cutter. The vault was not built of metal, but of dense ceramic compounds, its exterior bearing the complex, signature geometric patterns that marked Alwyn Pike's architectural genius. Corbin located the access panel, a small, recessed port designed to be invisible to Dizak scanning arrays. "Pike, give me the override sequence," Corbin whispered into his comms. "Accessing," the AI confirmed. "The panel requires a standard Old Republic biometric key, a thumbprint. The original Alwyn Pike's key is not available." "We use mine," Corbin stated, forcing his own thumb onto the reader. Ophiuchus Blacklist veterans share the same systemic fingerprint of administrative failure. She may have anticipated this. The panel glowed briefly, rejecting the input. Negative correlation. Access denied. Corbin cursed, pulling a multi-tool from his belt. He didn't have time for this. Valrith was 45 seconds out. He used the tool to peel back a layer of ceramic shielding. Beneath it, hidden, was a secondary input port, designed for a complex, non-standard optical fiber cable. "Pike, what is this?" "An analog data link, extremely high bandwidth. It bypasses all encryption. It is designed to download the data immediately upon physical connection without requiring validation codes." "A backdoor for emergency retrieval," Pike explained. She didn't trust her own codes, Corbin realized. She built the vault to defy logic, even her own. He reached back to his emergency kit, retrieving a spool of ultrafine optical cable. His hands, stiff and aching from the jump, moved slowly but surely. He connected one end of the cable to his datapad, the device that now held Kalen's entire life ledger. He inserted the other end into the vault port. Connection established. The download began instantly, a torrent of data flooding the limited storage of his salvaged datapad. Corbin braced himself, feeling the familiar cold dread of staring down an undeniable truth. The first file that opened was not an engineering manifest, but a personal diary entry from Alwyn Pike, dated 3 days before the Ophiuchus disaster. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The Ophiuchus failure wasn't due to poor alloys. It was structural sabotage. Pike had found hard evidence that the Synthera exchange, under the guise of an investment firm, had deliberately forced the Confederacy to decommission the life support backups on Ophiuchus Station to maximize profits on the salvaged materials that were later sold at triple the price. Pike hadn't just protested. She had secured the full list of Dizak officials who took the bribes. The Dizak Confederacy hadn't decommissioned her for emotional instability. They had exiled her to a black vault to ensure she couldn't expose their collusion with the criminal cartel. Corbin scrolled rapidly. Kalen's story fitted perfectly now. Kalen hadn't been paying off a simple loan. He was paying off extortion related to his mother's medical transfer. The Synthera exchange was using Kalen as collateral to recover the data trail he had inadvertently accessed during his initial repair job at Ophiuchus, a data trail that led directly back to Alwyn Pike's hidden vault. Kalen's death wasn't altruism driven by ruin. It was the final desperate act of a man trying to protect the data that would expose a conspiracy. He saved Tail not because of kindness, but because he knew the Verid, the only truly anti-materialistic power in the galaxy, were the only ones who could judge the Dizak exchange collusion. Corbin felt a cynical, terrible satisfaction. The Dizak had classified Kalen's act as altruism spontaneous to mask the truth. Kalen died trying to start a revolution. "Data transfer 98% complete," Pike announced. "The logical axiom has arrived. Strategist Valrith is scanning our position." The Dizak cruiser shimmered into existence a short distance away, its hull reflecting the cold light of the Verid entity. The axiom's powerful searchlights instantly pinned the crippled Flicker and Corbin against the vault. "Strath," Silas's voice boomed through the open comm channel, amplified and laced with synthetic static. "You are in violation of multiple Confederacy statutes. Disconnect from the vault immediately and prepare for extraction. Submit the data now. Did you find the trauma? Prove the irrationality." Corbin looked at the complete file on his datapad. irrefutable proof of systemic corruption, bribery, and mass murder engineered by the Synthera exchange and shielded by high-ranking DISAC officials. He had the means to clear Kalen's name, save Earth from quarantine, and expose the most powerful criminal syndicate in the galaxy. But he could only choose two. The impossible choice. If he transmitted the false narrative, Kalen was broken and accidental, Valrith would use it to appease the Verid, and Earth would be safe. But the Synthera exchange would continue its work, and Kalen's sacrifice would forever be recorded as an anomaly of madness. If he transmitted the truth, the documented greed, the planned murder, the DISAC collusion, the Verid would act. The Verid's form of judgment was final, swift, and existential. It would dismantle the Confederacy's entire financial structure. But Earth, categorized as the source of this contagious truth, would face immediate total annihilation from the exposed DISAC forces. Corbin looked across the void at the silent, luminous Verid entity, which had paused its diagnostic of the bounty hunter wreckage and was now observing the standoff. Kalen had chosen decency over survival. Corbin had to choose justice over convenience. He looked at the data pad, its screen displaying the 63% probability of detection that Valrith had calculated for his exit. Valrith always had a plan, but Kalen, the engineer ruined by the system, had acted outside of the plan. "Pike," Corbin said, his voice level, heavy with irreversible commitment. "We are going to give the Verid exactly what Kalen died to protect. Route the full, unencrypted Pike and Kalen archives to the Verid entity. Use the Vault's high-power comms array to bypass all jamming protocols. Designate the file title, The Structural Decay of Decency. Warning, Strath. This action will be instantly classified as a high-level act of species provocation, directly leading to the likely execution of the asset and an immediate DISAC military response against Earth," Pike warned, the lack of emotion only making the words colder. "I know," Corbin replied. "But Kalen's life wasn't a flaw in the system, Pike. It was a mirror. And they hate the reflection." He hit the transmission key. Instantly, the small ceramic vault pulsed with a violent, white-hot discharge of energy as the archival data, millennia of corruption proof, flew across the blackness toward the Verid. On the bridge of the logical axiom, Silas must have screamed. The DISAC cruiser reacted with pre-programmed, devastating efficiency. Not against Corbin, but against the source of the truth. A massive crimson beam of focused energy erupted from the axiom's hull, striking the blind vault directly. Corbin was still physically attached. The blast was not a weapon, but pure, unfiltered force designed to destroy data. The shockwave hit him first, a silent physical hammer in the vacuum. The optical cable snapped instantly, and Corbin was thrown violently backward, tumbling helplessly into the black, silent void. His vision swam. He was still alive. His suit filters struggling against the heat and dust. He was tumbling, watching the vault dissolve into incandescent vapor. And then, a new light. The Verid Guardian. The entity had received the transmission. Its bioluminescence flared, not emerald anymore, but a deep, throbbing violet. It pulsed once, then began to grow, spreading across the void. It wasn't moving toward the axiom in aggression, but in vast, terrifying expansion, absorbing the data and reacting to the injustice. "Pike!" Corbin wheezed, spinning uncontrollably, his datapad crushed by the force of the blast. "Did they get the full file?" Verification. 87% of the data transmitted successfully. The Verid are processing. Strategist Valrith has initiated Emergency Protocol Beta 7, the AI responded. Corbin looked at the logical axiom. The ship was retracting its light, its engines humming a retreat. They knew what they had done, and they knew what was coming. "What is Protocol Beta 7? Systemic purge of all human assets within the Synthera sector. Immediate quarantine of the solar system. Furthermore," Pike continued, a chilling pause following the data, "Valrith has designated a new primary target for assimilation." Corbin watched the DISAC cruiser vanish, leaving only the expanding silent purple of the Verid entity. "Who?" Corbin whispered, already knowing the answer. You, Strath. The price of uncontrolled decency is now due. Corbin tried to activate his maneuvering thrusters. Nothing. He was adrift, powerless, 30% of his body paralyzed from the concussion, floating in the void between the transcendental fury of the Verid and the cold, logical efficiency of the Dizak system he had just exposed. His vision tunneled. He was alone, but Kalen's name, he realized with final exhausted satisfaction, was finally clean. The price, however, had just gone up dramatically. The darkness was instantaneous, thick and heavy, like being buried under 10,000 meters of loose iron filings. Corbin's consciousness flickered back with a raw, agonizing pressure behind his eyes, a systemic shutdown attempting to save the core functions. He wasn't spinning anymore. He was motionless, tethered to the wreckage of the flicker by a thin safety wire he didn't remember attaching. He tried to draw a full breath, but the damaged suit filters only gave him a shallow metallic puff of recycled air. The paralysis in his left side, caused by the blast concussion, felt less like numbness and more like the limb had been permanently exchanged for lead. The Verid Guardian was gone. The overwhelming violet light had receded, absorbed back into the deep black of the Synthara void, leaving behind only the echoing paranoia of a species that now understood human corruption. The Dizak cruiser, the logical axiom, was also gone, retreating to initiate the protocols Valrith had ordered. Corbin was alone, adrift, dying slowly. The weight of his failure pressed down on him, not the failure to transmit the data, that much was done, but the failure to survive the consequence. Pike. Status report, Corbin rasped, the effort spiking the pain across his ribs. The AI responded with its synthesized lack of concern, filtering through the fractured comms link in his helmet. Current location, dead space, sector C17, external temperature, negative 260 degrees standard, internal suit integrity, 41%, sustained biological damage, severe systemic trauma, estimated time until final life support failure, 6 hours, 20 minutes. And the new primary target designation. Confirmed. You, Corbin Strath. Valrith has designated you a hostile ideological contagion, a priority 0 for elimination or assimilation. Protocol Beta 7 is fully active. All human assets within this quadrant are being prepared for quarantine or purge. Corbin closed his eyes, though it made no difference in the infinite blackness. He had sacrificed Earth's fragile safety for a point of principle, the integrity of a dead maintenance man named Kalen. He had played the high card of decency, and the galaxy had called his bluff. He admitted it to the cold vacuum. He was tired. Bone-deep, soul-crushing tired. 20 years fighting the logic of the Dizak, watching them systematically dismantle human ambition and replace it with calculated compliance. He had risked everything for Kalen, for Alwyn Pike, for the vague, abstract idea that human morality was more than a malfunction. And for what? To exchange slow economic extinction for rapid military annihilation? You should have given them the lie, Strath. The thought was a sudden, violent intrusion of doubt. You should have protected Earth, the greater good. He had failed the utilitarian math. He had acted out of rage, not strategy. The injustice of Kalen's death, a man ruined by the same system that crippled Corbin's career, had been too much to bear. He didn't save tail or expose the Dizak for galactic stability. He did it to finally land a punch against the bureaucratic machine that kept stealing everyone's dignity. It was selfish revenge disguised as righteous action. He was no hero. He was a disgraced, irradiated engineer, floating next to the cooling hulk of his dead ship, 30% paralyzed, with the entire Dizak military looking for him. The feeling of defeat was absolute, a crushing physical weight that made the blackness seem inviting. Pike, Corbin whispered, the word sounding small and hollow. Was it worth it? The AI did not immediately process the rhetorical question. It simply analyzed the data it had. The cost-benefit analysis of the truth transmission is unfavorable. 100% loss of personal survival probability. Estimated probability of Earth survival reduced by 93%. However, the integrity of the data transmission was secured. Objective complete. Objective complete. That was the cold, sterile epitaph of his entire life. Corbin tried to move his left arm again. A searing jolt of pain reminded him of the concussion damage. He couldn't operate the ship, even if he could somehow restore power to the primary flux modulator, which was highly unlikely given the damage to the hull. He needed leverage. He needed a miracle. And miracles in hard science fiction were usually just extremely obscure engineering hacks. He focused on the wreckage of the flicker. The ship was inert, but the residual energy signatures from the violently aborted jump were still stored in the stabilizing rings, useless without the flux modulator to channel them. Pike, give me the structural schematics for the flicker runner, model 2047B. Focus on the primary shielding array adjacent to the pilot console. The schematics appeared on his visor, blue lines superimposed on the silent dark hull. The primary shielding uses standard Confederacy-issue magnetic dispersion mesh, Pike stated, designed to deflect micrometeorites and minor radiation burst. I know the specs, Corbin interrupted, his mind beginning to work again, pushing the exhaustion aside. Does the magnetic mesh retain residual energy after the main power conduit is severed? Affirmative. The capacitors holding the charge for the magnetic field decay slowly. Estimated residual power, 0.003%. That's nothing, Corbin scoffed. It is 37 watts of retained power, Strath. Sufficient to recharge a small auxiliary battery, perhaps. Corbin didn't need a battery. He needed a distraction. He began to formulate an absurd, suicidal plan. The DISAC operated on logic, which meant they operated on predictable energy signatures. They would assume the flicker was a dead target. They wouldn't send a recovery team. They would send a low-power, automated retrieval drone to secure the wreckage and perform the assimilation, the final execution, with clinical efficiency. Pike, how far away is the nearest DISAC drone patrol currently operating under Beta 7 protocols? A Type R9 scavenger drone is approximately 40 minutes from your location, currently on an intercept vector. That gives us time, Corbin muttered. The R9 Scavenger was an automated insect-like machine designed for cleanup. Its weakness was its reliance on constant localized sensor feedback. It flew blind, trusting its sensors to guide its execution routine. We are going to use the flicker's magnetic shielding mesh as a low-frequency sensor jammer, Corbin explained, his voice gaining the familiar, cold precision of a systems architect facing a desperate build. Insufficient power, Strath. You require at least 300 watts to achieve meaningful disruption to the scavenger's array, Pike countered. We don't need to disrupt the array. We need to trick it. The scavenger's primary target confirmation routine requires a sustained, predictable energy signature, a life pulse, to identify the human target within the wreck. Corbin looked at his own severely damaged environmental suit. It contained a small, high-density emergency power pack, meant to provide just enough energy for 3 hours of enhanced mobility. Pike, reroute the remaining residual power from the flicker's magnetic mesh into my suit's auxiliary port. We are going to overload the life pulse confirmation signal. Warning. Overloading the auxiliary port with an uncontrolled discharge will rupture the power cell, causing an immediate violent explosion, Pike warned. Estimated outcome, vaporization of your lower torso. I know the failure rate, Pike. That's the point. Corbin's voice was steady now, free of doubt. He was back in the moment, back to engineering a catastrophe. If I overload the signal, the scavenger will detect a massive energy signature, too large, too bright, too alive, and it will assume the target is either a false positive or an incoming hostile ship, not a crippled human. It will initiate its avoidance subroutine. The scavenger will retreat, but you will be functionally destroyed, Pike pointed out, sticking to the cold math. No, Corbin corrected, a dark, dry humor returning to his voice, fueled by the adrenaline of necessity. I need the explosion. That explosion is my shield. He began crawling, slowly and painfully, toward the rear access of the cockpit, relying only on the strength of his right arm. He located the emergency release for the heavy junction box connecting the magnetic mesh to the primary circuit. The metal was cold against his gloved fingers. The scavenger drone is now 37 minutes away. It is traveling at optimal velocity, Pike reported. Corbin found the terminal. It was a thick, rubber-coated bundle of wires. He used his multi-tool, carefully scraping away the rubber insulation. Pike, prepare the rerouting sequence. Initiate on my command. I need to make the jump before the explosion hits my main systems, and I need the jump to be weak enough to survive. Jump drive is inert, Strath. 0 charge remaining. We'll use the magnetic pulse itself, Corbin argued, fighting the pain in his chest. When the residual power explodes, the magnetic field will collapse violently. If we time the collapse correctly, we can use the electromagnetic shockwave as an improvised, one-time directional thrust. It won't be a jump, it will be a kick. The engineering was sloppy, desperate, and relied on perfect timing, and physics pushed past their breaking point. It was exactly the kind of irrational, high-risk gambit Valrith would never calculate. Corbin stripped the final wire. The copper gleamed dully in the reflected light of the dead ship. He pressed the exposed wires against the auxiliary port of his own suit's power pack. Rerouting sequence ready, Strath. 30 minutes to drone intercept, Corbin murmured. He looked out into the void, no longer seeing the failure, but the cold, beautiful chaos of a universe that sometimes yielded to a desperate hand. He activated the suit's emergency boost with his good hand, preparing the final connection. The familiar low hum of the power pack suddenly changed pitch, escalating into a high, whining screech of rapidly accumulating charge. The wires began to glow an unhealthy white-hot. Reroute initiated. System overload imminent. Detonation in T-5 seconds, Pike announced, its voice sharp with synthesized urgency. Corbin took a final, ragged breath. He closed his eyes, focusing all his remaining will on the sequence. Connect. Explode. Kick. Now, Pike, he screamed. Corbin slammed the wires fully into the port, completing the circuit. The scream of the charge immediately intensified, a deafening, white-hot shriek filling his helmet. A flash of blinding, contained energy erupted from the junction box. Not a detonation, but a controlled rupture. The force of the magnetic field collapse hit him like a hydraulic ram, slamming his body into the bulkhead. And then, the sound of the drone's proximity alarm, loud and sudden, broke through the comms. Warning, hostile energy spike detected. Initiating evasion maneuver, Pike screamed, mimicking the drone's logic perfectly. Corbin felt the sudden, violent lurch as the magnetic shockwave did its work, kicking the wreckage of the flicker hard and fast into the deep black. He was momentarily blinded, deafened, and completely, violently thrown against his restraints. When the pain subsided, the shrieking was gone. The only sound was the ragged wheeze of his suit. He was alive. He had moved. He had escaped the drone. Pike! Corbin coughed, trying to regain orientation. Where are we? We have been propelled off course by 180 degrees. We are now traveling at approximately 300 kilometers per second, directly away from Dizak patrol routes. However, the debris from the magnetic pulse has attracted attention. A nearby Confederacy cruiser has just designated our spike as a kinetic energy weapon discharge. A kinetic weapon, Corbin repeated, running a hand over the ruptured, still-smoking junction box. Better than being an ideological contagion. Uncertain. Strategist Valrith has just updated the target profile. Corbin Strath. Extremely high threat. Confirmed use of asymmetric propulsion technology derived from weaponized structural decay. Engage on sight. Furthermore, Pike added, the long pause indicating the delivery of truly devastating information. The violent discharge compromised our ability to travel dark. Our trajectory leads directly to the primary Varid assimilation zone. Predicted time to intercept, 42 minutes. Corbin stared out at the rapidly receding starfield. He hadn't bought safety. He had simply traded one predator for two. He was racing toward the most existentially powerful, unpredictable species in the galaxy, having just weaponized their local space against the Dizak. He laughed, a painful dry sound in the strained air of his suit. I guess I don't need a ship, Pike. I just need an entrance. He was broken, bleeding and hurtling toward an inevitable confrontation. He had lost everything, but in the process, he had found the only thing left to him: pure, unadulterated engineering defiance. The small, cracked viewport showed nothing but the terrifying approach of the Varid domain. Corbin, now fully resigned to his fate, began planning. He had 40 minutes to prepare his final stand. It wouldn't be a fight, but a presentation. The last, desperate gambit to prove that human trauma, the systemic decay he and Kalen had endured, could be converted into terrible, transformative power. Bevor wir weitermachen, eine kurze Frage. Von wo aus siehst du dir diese Geschichte an? Der Kommandant wäre begeistert zu erfahren, wie weit unsere Flotte bereits vorgedrungen ist. The white noise screamed inside Corbin's helmet. It was worse than silence, a jagged physical assault caused by the massive electromagnetic discharge. He clawed at the emergency filter switch with his functional right hand, the motion sending jolts of searing pain through his damaged left side. The world was strobe lit by intermittent, angry red fault lights from the shattered console of the flicker. Pike, local comms integrity, Corbin ground out, the words raw and strained. The AI responded with a sputtering digital whine before stabilizing. Local comms restored to 40% efficiency. The magnetic kickback created a focused pulse weapon. You avoided the scavenger, Strath, but you are now classified as a high-yield ordnance delivery system by 3 separate Confederacy patrol units. Good, Corbin rasped, a thin, strained smile cracking the exhaustion on his face. If they think I'm a bomb, they won't come close enough to capture the wreckage. What is Valrith doing now? The debris field generated by the pulse had bought him precious seconds of confusion, but Valrith was not a strategist known for paralysis. Corbin knew the Dizak were already adapting, shifting the logic of the entire quadrant against him. Incoming data purge, designation, excision, Pike stated, its voice suddenly tight with synthesized alarm. A sweeping high-density erasure attempt focused on the Synthera sector network. Valrith is trying to retroactively delete all copies of Kalen's life data before you reach the Varid. Corbin slammed his hand against the bulkhead, the impact jarring his damaged ribs. Valrith wasn't fighting the human. Valrith was fighting the inconvenient truth. If Kalen's sacrifice could be proven to be a pure, selfless act, it shattered the Dizak predictive models. If the data was erased, Kalen was just a dead, desperate man, and Corbin was a rogue agent with a damaged memory core. Can you defend the transmission? Negative. Valrith's logic nets are too powerful. The truth is being sterilized. Estimated time until data integrity drops below 1%. 3 minutes. Corbin looked down at the physical datapad still tethered to his wrist, the one containing the comprehensive, compiled narrative of Kalen's tragic economic ruin and final act. He had intended to present this evidence to the Varid, proving that Kalen's decency was a result of his failure, not a state-sponsored weapon. But if Valrith successfully purged the network, that datapad, the single physical archive, would become the Confederacy's priority target, either for capture or immediate destruction. It was too fragile. It was too accessible. Pike, Corbin said, his voice dropping to the cold, focused register of a man executing a high-risk technical repair. Isolate the datapad's primary storage core. I need a bypass loop from the core directly into the Flicker's emergency life support CPU. Warning. The datapad core is designed for external access. Attempting to integrate it into the CPU of a damaged environmental suit will result in catastrophic data fragmentation and possible thermal failure of the life support matrix. I don't need access. I need security, Corbin insisted, gritting his teeth. Valrith is using high-frequency digital erasure. I need to shield the core using obsolete hardware. I need to make the data inaccessible to anyone except me, even if it kills the computer. This was the final messy battle of systems. The clean, perfect logic of the Dizak AI versus the desperate, analog hack of a human engineer. He used the remnants of his multi-tool to tear open the datapad casing, exposing the tiny ceramic storage core. The air inside his helmet grew thick with the acrid smell of ozone and hot metal. He then turned his attention to his own suit. With agonizing effort, he ripped open the heavy plating on his chest, revealing the main life support CPU, a tangle of fiber optics and cooling gel. The system hissed, protesting the exposure to the vacuum. He had maybe 20 seconds before the CPU overheated or shorted out. He used the thick rubberized insulation from the magnetic pulse wires, the very material that had nearly vaporized his torso moments ago, to manually bundle the storage core against the CPU's auxiliary transfer port. It was crude, held together by a single strand of emergency binding tape. 3 seconds until data collapse. Strath! Corbin forced the final connection. The datapad core clicked, locking into the obsolete, inefficient port. The entire suit jolted violently. Data transfer initiating, Pike announced, its voice now laced with high-frequency distortion. 99% integrity maintained, but the integration has caused a critical system lock. The Flicker's last remaining sensor package is fried. We are now running blind. Furthermore, the life support CPU is operating at maximum thermal load. Corbin slumped against the bulkhead, breathing shallowly. He had saved the data, but he had lost his eyes and his ability to navigate. The entire structural integrity report of Kalen's life was now physically welded into his dying suit. Shielded by hardware Valrith hadn't bothered to calculate for redundancy. The excision protocol has failed, Pike reported, a note of synthesized satisfaction entering its tone. Valrith's command cruiser is initiating pursuit, estimated intercept in 12 hours. But you are still on a direct, uncontrolled trajectory toward the Verid assimilation zone. Predicted intercept, 25 minutes. 25 minutes, Corbin muttered, tasting copper and burned plastic in the recycled air. And we are blind. He looked through the cracked viewport. The dark was no longer absolute. Distant, massive shapes were appearing on the edge of the Synthara void, not sharp, geometric Dizak warships, but structures that seemed woven from moonlight and deep space gravity. They were the Verid. Corbin felt the profound isolation of his situation. He was just a human engineer, 30% paralyzed, with a dying suit, hurtling on the wreckage of a disposable ship, carrying the ghost of a dead man protected by a jerry-rigged CPU. He wasn't fighting an army anymore. He was fighting the sheer scale of the universe. Pike, Corbin ordered, wiping sweat from his brow. Focus remaining power on the external comms array. I can't see them, but they can see me. I need to make sure they understand what they are looking at. Attempting to broadcast. Warning, transmitting on this frequency may draw immediate hostile action from the Verid, who maintain strict communication silence, Pike warned. Corbin ignored the warning. He knew the Verid wouldn't react to static or bluster. They only reacted to sincerity, or to profound, unpredictable actions, like Kalen choosing to die for a child. Use the magnetic mesh remnants to modulate the comms array, Corbin instructed. I need to broadcast a sustained high-fidelity signal. Not data, not threat, just recognition. He realized the true purpose of his absurd magnetic kick. It hadn't just been a thrust, it had been a signature. Valrith had correctly classified it as a kinetic weapon derived from structural decay, but to the Verid, the species obsessed with the subtle logic of existence, it might look like something else entirely. The sound of the broadcast was not auditory. It was an energy signature. A massive, erratic pulse of energy flowing from the damaged Flicker, carving a defiant, desperate line across the void. It was the sound of a system failing beautifully. As the time ticked down, the Verid presence became absolute. 3 colossal structures, silent and impossibly smooth, materialized around the wreckage. They moved with a terrifying slowness, their approach generating no noise, no engine wash, only the gravitational pressure of massive, ancient hulls. Verid vessels confirmed, Pike reported, its synthesized voice strained. They are initiating localized field containment. We are being apprehended, Strath. Corbin watched, mesmerized, as the central Varid vessel opened a vast, segmented hatch, a portal of shifting light designed to swallow the flicker whole. There was no negotiation, no warning, just silent, powerful acquisition. "They're taking the bait," Corbin whispered. "They think the wreckage is the message." A beam of shimmering violet energy, far softer than the Dizak's capture fields, enveloped the flicker. The sudden stabilizing pressure was immense, crushing the remaining warped metal and forcing Corbin deeper into his restraints. He was now motionless, a prisoner hurtling toward an unknown fate, relying entirely on the story embedded in his fractured CPU. The last thing he saw before the Varid hatch closed around the flicker was the readout on his visor. Target update: Corbin Strath. Threat level: assimilation. Final objective: acquire narrative integrity. Then, the profound silence of the Varid containment field descended, heavier and colder than the Synthera void. Corbin was trapped, his body broken, his ship gone, rushing toward a species that wanted to interrogate not his actions, but his soul. He had escaped the logic of the Dizak only to face the philosophical judgment of the Varid. The war for Kalen's decency was over, and the war for Corbin's survival was just beginning. He had saved the truth, but he had delivered himself into the hands of the cosmos's most formidable judges. He was alone, and he was ready for them to begin. The violet light of the containment field dissolved, replaced by a dense unearthly gray, the heavy, grinding noise of the flicker. Being physically compressed and absorbed by the Varid ship ceased. The silence was immense, not the empty silence of space, but the loaded, pressurized silence of something ancient and highly focused. Corbin felt the sudden, agonizing withdrawal of adrenaline. The pain, previously a distant hum under the high-frequency tension of flight, roared back, a symphony of cracked bone and torn muscle in his left side. His suit's emergency life support, the same unit now physically fused to Kalen's core data, sputtered once before locking into a low, sustainable recycle rate. The frantic red alarm lights blinked out, replaced by a single steady orange diagnostic symbol. Survival, but barely. "Pike?" Corbin whispered, his voice dry, the air tasting of sulfur and stale metal. Pike responded, not in its previous synthesized confidence, but as a fractured thought pulsing directly onto the helmet display. Integrity compromised. Processing capacity, 7%. Status: active witness. "Good?" Corbin sighed, the word catching in his throat. He was no longer strapped into the ruined pilot seat. The Varid field had gently, but firmly, extracted him and his life support shell from the shredded hull. He was floating, immobilized, suspended in a zero-gravity chamber that smelled faintly of minerals and non-reactive gases. Around him, the Varid worked. They were large, dark shapes, moving with a fluid, terrifying efficiency. They were not inspecting the damage. They were analyzing the failure. A specialized energy field isolated the scorched remnants of his suit. Corbin watched a thin metallic probe approach his chest, drawn inevitably to the point where the datapad core was crudely wired into the life support CPU. He had won the battle of systems. Valrith's logic nets couldn't touch this information. It was physically integrated using obsolete, unpredictable hardware. But victory felt cheap, paid for in blood and freedom. He watched the Varid probe trace the binding tape and the thick, burnt insulation used to shield the core, the messy, analog solution of a desperate human. He imagined the Dizak strategist, Valrith, watching this feed, and felt a cold, ironic satisfaction. Valrith had predicted human failure, but had failed to calculate the messy tenacity of human desperation. A shift in the environment signaled the next step. The chamber filled with a soft light and a controlled gravitational field. Corbin sank gently onto a smooth obsidian slab. He was a specimen on a dissecting table. A visual interface materialized above him, flickering with Varid glyphs that translated instantly into standard galactic by Pike's struggling memory core. Query: the object of altruism. Corbin didn't need to answer verbally. The Varid weren't interested in rhetoric. They were interested in the narrative housed in his chest. The probe retreated and instead A wider field of gentle diagnostic energy enveloped his body, mapping the information storage core. They are reading Kalen's life, Corbin thought, closing his eyes against the soft alien light. He didn't see the data stream, but he knew what the Varid were absorbing. The ledger of debts, the eviction notices, the failure report from Ophiuchus, the loneliness of Kalen's last 3 years of exile, and finally, the perfect, irrational flash of decency when he chose the Varid child, Tal, over his own survival. He felt the Varid energy field trace the scars on his own body, reading his own history of bureaucratic failure and misplaced loyalty. He wasn't just delivering Kalen's story, he was presenting the whole curriculum of human ruin. After what felt like hours, the diagnostic field retracted. The Varid shapes remained motionless, silent. The judgment was internal, vast. Then, a new visual interface appeared, translating a simple, final command. Status, narrative acquired, integrity confirmed. Judgment. The act was not provocation, it was consequence. Corbin let out a slow, shaky breath. He had done it. He had proved that Kalen's decency was organic, born from his own broken human architecture, not a weapon of state. The Confederacy, the Dizak, were safe from the threat of spontaneous, uncalculated kindness. The Varid would not assimilate the Synthara sector because a human had been decent, but the Dizak always had a contingency plan. The screen shifted. The Varid message was gone, replaced by a simple, geometric logo of the Confederacy and a data stamp 3 light-years away. From Commander Silas, logical axiom. To Corbin Strath, designate Rogue Agent 7. Communication log, retroactive amnesty offered. Acceptance is implicit due to current disposition, Varid captivity. Reasoning. The isolation of Subject Strath serves the function of the human containment protocol. By removing the primary vector of unstable empathy from Confederate space, predictive stability is increased by 83%. Action. Subject Strath is hereby considered administratively deceased. All past liabilities concerning Ophiuchus are sealed. His existence is officially irrelevant. The price of galactic stability is paid. Corbin laughed, a dry, rattling sound in the dead air of the suite. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't even a prisoner of war. He was an anomaly excised from the equation. Administratively dead. The perfect, elegant solution. Valrath had lost the data war, but won the endgame by turning Corbin into a self-sacrificing footnote. A large Varid form approached the slab. It didn't touch him, but an energy field gently severed the life support system from the wreckage of the datapad core. The core was sealed within a shimmering, bioluminescent container. Kalen's story, the hard-won truth, was now a museum piece, preserved by the very species it was meant to inform. He was lifted, his paralyzed body utterly dependent. He was being moved deeper into the Varid vessel, toward a fate that would likely involve endless philosophical observation rather than physical torture. A life sentence of silent scrutiny. As the chamber doors slid open, revealing a vast, crystalline corridor, Corbin thought back to the start of this entire debacle, standing in the sterile Dizak observation deck. He remembered the smell the disinfectant couldn't quite kill, the ghost odor of burned insulation and old human sweat, Kalen's legacy. He realized now that smell wasn't just about Kalen's failure. It was the scent of messy, imperfect survival. The smell of the human engineer who paid his debts until the very end, even if those debts were paid with a life. Corbin Strath, rogue engineer, closed his eyes for the first time in 3 days, accepting the heavy weight of his new, indefinite existence. The vastness of the universe was a cold prison, but for the first time in decades, he didn't owe anyone anything. He had traded a life of systemic ruin for a perfect prison. A kind of peace, then. He was gone from the Confederacy's ledgers, but Kalen's story, shielded by obsolete hardware and fueled by pure resentment, remained. The only thing left was the silence, the weight of profound, universal indifference. He survived the war for truth, only to become the consequence. The ghost odor of burned insulation and old sweat lingered even here, carried on the recycled air of his damaged suit. He was exactly what the Dizak feared: uncontrollable empathy, perfectly isolated, now archived. The truth was safe, and that was the last thing that mattered to anyone else, or to him. Wenn dir diese Mission gefallen hat, schließe dich unserer Crew an. Abonniere den Kanal und teile diese Episode mit jemandem, der Science Fiction liebt. Jedes neue Crewmitglied stärkt unsere Flotte und hält diese Geschichten im ganzen Universum